So that he said he didn't want to get involved, that's Nicole Kessinger, 30-year-old woman that he was having an affair with. And now I want to break down what we just saw. And joining me is a very special guest, criminal defense attorney Matthew Mangino is with us. Matthew, great to see you.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so you hear the tactics that the police are trying to use to get information from him. This is textbook, right?
It is, and it's dramatic video, and it really shows an in-depth look at how the police conduct interrogations. But as a practical matter, it's also very important to note that this is why people who are accused of crimes shouldn't talk to the police without a lawyer and shouldn't take polygraph tests and other things. I mean, this is really an example of why you need legal counsel.
Yep, that's a fair statement. Yep. They're seeing it right here. And really they're trying to say, well, Shanann was controlling. We understand. Tell us what happened. Let's play a little bit more of this interrogation tape. You want to find them. You want to find them. Matthew, is it fascinating for you to see someone just blatantly lying like that? He lied on the porch. He's lying to investigators. How does someone do that?
Well, obviously, he thinks that he can convince prosecutors. I mean, he has a lot of confidence in himself. He believes he can sit down with detectives and tell them a story that they're going to believe, and he also believes that he can convince them that he's telling the truth. He's not as smart as he thinks he is, unfortunately for him. And now these detectives are very effectively drawing information out of him and doing really an excellent job.
We saw him during his sentencing barely showing any emotion. This is his porch video. Not an ounce of emotion, okay? What the emotion that we kind of see in the interrogation tape, it is your opinion that he's acting?
Well, I think he's trying to, put a little show on for the detectives, for the investigators in this case. But he also might be starting to think, hey, I'm in trouble here. And his emotion is for himself, in fact, because he knows that this questioning is leading him more and more toward the truth that he didn't really want to tell them at the outset. So it's an interesting dynamic.
I want to talk after our next break about why he didn't lawyer up, and was this ultimately, he pled guilty in order to avoid the death penalty, but I was curious what other strategies he may have had. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to play a lot more of that police interrogation video. This is really good interrogation techniques right now, even explaining the fact that he showed no emotion about the fact that his baby girls, vanished. Now, Matthew, as we watch this, I can't help but wonder, if he never confessed, if he lawyered up in the beginning, would we have ever known would he have ever been arrested? Would he have ever been charged? Would he have ever been found guilty? Would we have even found the bodies?
Well, that's a good question, and obviously his cooperation, helped find the bodies and do things like that. But if he makes no statement, if he takes no polygraph, they have to piece together a circumstantial case. Obviously, there's some things here, like the affair that he was having, so he has a motive. But how do they piece this case together without him? And unfortunately, he is the best piece of evidence that they had in this case with regard to the death of his wife and children.
Do you see a lot of cases, really, where somebody is having an affair and they realistically think, I can get rid of my current family and start a life with somebody else? They really believe that can happen for them?
Yeah, you have to look at the personality of someone like this. Now we know, for instance, that he's having an affair, that he may have had other liaisons with women. He's a player. He's a guy that thinks, I can manipulate, I can charm, and he thinks he can bring that right into the interrogation room. I can charm these detectives. I can convince people of things that really aren't true because I'm good at that, and I'm smarter than everybody else, and that's how I've been able to do all these things that I've done.
Yeah, one of the reports came out that he actually had relations with somebody he met on Tinder. While he was having an affair with Nicole Kessinger, he was with another woman as well. The interesting part is, when we were first hearing the Chris Watts case, information was coming out constantly. We didn't know what to believe. One of the first reports, and which we'll probably hear in this interrogation tape, is that he said he killed Shanann because Shanann killed the daughters. Now, I've heard of cases like that before. When you first heard this, did you think that might be believable?
Well, I thought it was a stretch. I mean, I think what you're trying to convince somebody of is that this was the heat of passion. This woman just murdered my 2 children, and I snapped. So you're looking at a lesser degree of culpability here than you are someone who plans and premeditates a murder of his wife and children. It's just what someone, whether he's a sociopath or a psychopath, they think that they have certain skills, and they do at times, to convince people, to manipulate people, to carry out plans that others would not have the moxie or the courage to try to carry out. Whether those plans are foolish or not, that may be the case in this particular instance.
We cover a lot of bad people on this network. A lot of bad people. We listen to their upbringings. We see they've had a really difficult life, in and out of jail. How does this guy go all these years, has a family, 2 beautiful girls, a loving wife, and just one day decides to commit the most horrific crime and cover it up and not show an ounce of emotion? Was he always like this, in your opinion? Do you think there were signs like this? If you go back to his life and look at everything, you could have predicted this is something he might have done? I mean, in your experience, do you see this more often than not?
Well, what you see in this case is an escalation of his activity. Now, you can have sociopaths or psychopaths who never commit any crime, but they may be, tyrants in the workplace, and they may be connivers or in the workplace or at home with their family. Here we see a guy who has convinced his mistress that he is estranged from his wife, that he loves his children. She said he was available at any time. You have to have some skill to put yourself, you're married, you're at home with your family, yet you're available to your mistress at any time. So the guy, he has a history of manipulation. He has a history of this kind of conduct. It's just escalated to murder.
He was deceiving 2 women at the exact same time, and clearly the result for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste was awful. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have more of the police interrogation tape for you. That's Chris Watts telling his father that his wife killed their kids. Matthew, my question is this common to bring a family member into a police interrogation video? It was all on tape. We all saw it. Is this common to try to get them to elicit an answer?
If the accused will let it happen. I mean, no lawyer worth his salt who is representing somebody and there's a meeting with the police, you're not going to let family members get involved. You're not going to let that emotion have some influence on the interview. Yeah, it's unusual when you're not, but when you're not represented by counsel, anything can happen because the police will do what they can to try to get as much information as possible.
Yeah, but sometimes those family members are able to get information that the police can't, and you can only imagine what it's like to be Ronnie Watts listening to this. Now, I want to compare what you just heard to when Ronnie Watts read a statement in Chris Watts' sentencing hearing. Let's check that out. Now, you have to imagine that that statement was read on behalf of Ronnie Watts, probably because it was just too emotional for him to read it in the courtroom. Matthew, would you agree? Because it's hard to understand what's going on, what it's like to be Ronnie Watts.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's agonizing to think of a father who had to sit there initially and listen to his son confess to the murder of his wife, and then know that he's going to serve the rest of his life in prison. And getting up and presenting that statement to the court and basically saying, I forgive you for what you've done, and you're being held accountable, and I understand that. But ultimately, I want to understand why it happened, and there's no answer for that yet.
He took away his parents' grandchildren. He took away their daughter-in-law. It's not just about him. It's about the family that he took away from them. That's where it gets just so tragic.
Right, and actually that's how his parents got to testify at the sentencing hearing, because they're considered victims because their grandchildren were murdered.
In your experience, do parents in these kinds of situations, when they see that their children have committed unspeakable crimes, do they look back and say, is there something I could have done different? Is there something that I made a mistake? Again, there's no blaming them at all. But I'm curious the reaction to family members of people that commit really unspeakable crimes.
Well, I'm sure. I'm sure they spend every night lying in bed thinking, what mistake did I make? What could I have done different? Raising my son. Why did this happen? How did I contribute to it? It's got to be an agonizing, painful experience.
Yeah, we can't forget that Chris Watts' mother first didn't believe this, and then she changed her tune a little bit in the sentencing hearing as well. We'll talk about that more a little bit. I want to play more of Chris Watts' interrogation video that was just released. Okay, so that was Chris Watts saying that Shanann was the one who killed the children. Now, Matthew, as you watch this, right, are you getting the sense that he's still playing a part here? He's still playing a role, because this is, again, not true, but do you think he's like, okay, let me be emotional here. I think I'm weaning them in. I'm coming up with a story now that shows why I was hiding something.
Yeah, I think he's trying now to mitigate the seriousness of what he did, if you can imagine that. I mean, he's now saying, I murdered my wife because she murdered our children. So he's still trying to downplay his involvement in this. He knows now that he's got a problem, and he's trying to mitigate that. He's still trying to manipulate. He's still trying to control the message here.
So he's in this video trying not to only manipulate the investigators, but his father as well.
Right, which he did from the outset. I mean, obviously, he had his whole family out, searching, trying to find out what might have happened. They're all filled with anxiety, trying to figure out where their grandchildren and their daughter-in-law is, or daughter. So yeah, I mean, this has been one manipulation or one deception after another, and as things started to collapse on him, now he's trying to mitigate it to some extent.
Would there have ever been a chance that defense would have worked?
No. I mean, I don't think anybody believes, even, I'm sure his father sitting there with his hand on his shoulder is saying to himself, I know my daughter-in-law isn't going to murder her 2 children while she's pregnant with another child. Mm-hmm. So it's just it's a sad, difficult, painful situation for everybody involved.
I'm going to ask you the million-dollar question that a lot of people ask in these kinds of scenarios. If people are having such trouble with their spouses, they fall in love with somebody else, they want to start a new life, people do it every day. Why do they resort to this?
They want to be the good guy. If you file for divorce when you got a pregnant wife and 2 children because you want to be with another woman, well, you're a bad guy. Everybody in the community thinks you're a bad guy. Your family thinks you're a bad guy. If they disappear, if someone murdered them, then you're a victim.
Well, that didn't work out so well for Chris Watts. I'm pretty sure he doesn't look like a good guy. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, so that was Chris Watts' interrogation video. I want to get some final thoughts from Matthew Mangino about this part. The idea that if he never said where the bodies were, okay? Let me rephrase. If he never disposed of the bodies, if he never did the porch interview, if he had killed Shanann and killed the girls but said, hey, I only killed Shanann because she killed the girls, could he have gone off?
Well, I don't know that killing his wife would have been justified after he she murdered the children. It may be a mitigation, the heat of passion, that sort of thing. But this wasn't well planned out, obviously. I mean, there's no way he could have said that this was some intruder or something like that. He never tried to say that because he removed the bodies. I mean, he put his 2 precious children in drums of oil. I mean, that's certainly not someone who come home and found his children dead, was so outraged, was so upset that he killed his wife. I mean, the facts don't make sense.
So, was he stupid? I mean, really, like, what was the goal here? People don't disappear out of thin air. And if he wanted to do that, when he's being interrogated, why didn't he lawyer up?
Well, he should have, and I think it's hubris. I think it's a guy who thinks he's smarter than other people. It's a guy who thinks he can manipulate, he can deceive, he can get what he wants. And maybe he's been successful at that in small areas, but this is a whole different ballgame.
Well, I'll tell you what he didn't want. He didn't want life in prison, and that's what his new reality is. He will never step foot out of prison for the rest of his life. And as soon as there's any more information about the Chris Watts whole saga, we'll make sure to bring it to you here on Law and Crime. But when we come back from our next break, we're going to switch gears and focus on the police cover-up trial out of Chicago, Illinois, because we know that tomorrow trial will begin again, but we have so much to recap based upon last week. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Okay, let's break this down right now with criminal defense attorney Matthew Mangino. Matthew, I don't think we've had an opportunity to talk really about this case in depth. So first question I have for you is, how difficult is it to prove conspiracy?
Well, you have to show that more than one person, in this case 3 people, sat down and got together to try to carry out a plan that effectively would result in the crime. The crime is obstruction of justice and official misconduct, and these 3 sat down, planned how they were going to try to change the version, change the story here for Officer Van Dyke.
So what we learned last week is that Thomas Gaffney's grand jury testimony stated that Van Dyke and other officers from the scene, possibly even their union representatives and attorneys, they were all hanging out together and they were talking before these official reports were written out. And one of the defense attorneys said that, look, it's a large area, it's a large room, there were a lot of officers there, that's standard operating procedure to have these conversations. What would your response be to that?
Well, is that part of the procedure? Do they have meetings with all of the potential witnesses together? I mean, typically in a regular criminal investigation, you're going to separate witnesses. You're going to put witnesses in different rooms and you're going to talk to them so that they can't try to make their stories conform to one another. Why wouldn't you do that with police officers who've witnessed a shooting?
It's a lot of questions in this case, and hopefully we'll get some answers as this trial continues. We believe the state has one more witness that they're going to call, but it's not so simple as that. We'll talk more about it right after this break. That's the defense attorney for David March in his opening statement speaking to the judge, because there's no jury here. This is a bench trial. And I want to get your perspective, Matthew, on that argument that he's making, particularly the idea of casting the blame so much on Laquan McDonald. Thoughts?
Well, he's really animated, and he's putting the blame on Laquan McDonald. He's saying that certainly there was another victim here, a private citizen, that there was an issue with regard to him, attacking the police car and that sort of thing. This is about obstruction of justice after this incident occurred. It's not exactly, what occurred during this incident. What I thought was compelling about his argument was that the report by his client was 50 pages long, and they're focusing in and drilling in on a couple of lines in a 50-page report.
But why are we even talking about this issue when it was already resolved that Jason Van Dyke didn't do the right thing? I mean, it doesn't matter what Laquan McDonald did, right?
Well, I think it does to a certain extent if you can prove that there was some concern among the police officers that he was going to be involved in assaultive conduct. I mean, if you're a police officer, the threshold is much lower in terms of assault than it is for a private citizen. So, what's their perception of what happened there? Did they feel threatened? And if they felt threatened, that could raise this to an aggravated assault or aggravated battery, which then makes their report entirely consistent with what they observed that night.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next defendant, Joseph Walsh. Again, his defense attorney will now provide his opening statement. Okay, so those are all the defense's opening statements, but I want to talk about where we are right now, Matthew. So currently the trial is going to come back tomorrow, and one of the reasons is the judge is reviewing all of these emails that became a big issue at the end of the week, and whether or not she will ultimately allow them into evidence or not. If they will be allowed into evidence, the state will call one more witness to ultimately authenticate those emails. What you've seen, though, could this make or break the prosecution's case? Because what we can tell is these emails are crucial to establishing that these reports by these officers were falsified.
Right. They are very important to give a more expansive picture of exactly what was going on here in terms of this idea of a conspiracy. What's troubling about these emails is that some of these emails are from individuals who are obviously unindicted individuals who haven't been called to testify or not subject to cross-examination. So this would appear to be hearsay. Now, the prosecution is saying because there's misleading or false statements in these emails, they should be admissible. But the defendants have a right to confront those people who put these emails together and what they said in these emails. So it's a very important issue in this case.
And could it ultimately decide that we believe it's from, police department supervisors? Is there also a sense that perhaps they use some of this information in these emails in the reports? I know you said when you were reviewing the actual reports, there was something that stood out to you a little bit about the actual content of them that could help establish a conspiracy.
Right. There was some language that was exactly identical, verbatim in all three reports. That that there was an attack with a knife, parenthetically attempt, and other language that was identical. So that would lead, to some suggestion that there was collusion, there was a conspiracy between these three individuals to put the same exact information in the reports. The big picture is that some of these reports were 40, 50 pages long, and we're only pulling out a line or two. Now, I think it's important to look at these emails and the judges reviewing them, but what's more important is the defendants should have a right to confront those witnesses, to confront those people who wrote those emails, to what their state of mind is, what they were talking about, what that meant to them, and did they have any contact with these defendants?
Yeah, and the counter-argument is those one lines are really could be the most important about whether or not Laquan McDonald attacked or lunged or was the aggressor. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. That was Thomas Gaffney's partner, Officer Joseph McGilligot, testifying about what he saw during the Laquan McDonald shooting, and it's really different from what we see in those police reports, right, Matthew? So he didn't see a threat. He didn't see an aggravated assault. He didn't see something that would justify the use of force. Important witness for the prosecution, right?
It certainly is, and it's never easy as a police officer. I don't care what police department that you work for, to testify against other police officers. And he did it in the Van Dyke trial, and he's doing it in this trial as well.
Can you say, one of the arguments that we've heard by the defense attorneys is, hey, listen, everybody observes things differently. And just because you don't agree with what a report says or you don't agree about testimony doesn't make someone a liar, doesn't mean that they falsified information, it doesn't mean it's a conspiracy. What would you say to that?
Well, it's important. What you said is perception. I mean, people look at things differently. Even trained police officers look at a situation and evaluate it differently. And if they feel as though they're under threat, does that give basis to an attempted assault by an individual who's carrying a weapon? So this is not as easy as it might look. I mean, this is a difficult trial.
I was the same thing. It was difficult to see what was going to happen in the Jason Van Dyke case. Does that ruling, that guilty verdict, does that play into this trial at all? Will the judge consider that at any point in her ruling?
I don't think that she will, and I think that's precisely why the defense has asked for a bench trial, because you're not going to get those same emotions, those same passions that a jury might get by looking at a videotape or hearing about the way the Laquan McDonald aspect of this case was handled. So the judge is dispassionate, and that's why it's a bench trial.
Yeah, it makes it a very unique trial at that, and we'll talk more about why that is in a little bit. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Two different cross-examinations, two different lines of questioning there for the same witness. Matthew, what did you see the similarities and differences between what the defense attorneys for Thomas Gaffney and David March were doing?
Well, I thought that the latter cross-examination was very effective, because what he's going to is the state of mind. What did the police officers, even Officer McGilligot, what was he thinking? Was he in fear? Yes, he was. Was he apprehensive? Yes, he was. Was he alert? Did he have his gun drawn? I mean, in a situation like that, it's obvious that you're concerned about other officers. You're concerned about your own well-being. So this sheds sort of a different light on this whole case. We heard from the prosecution nonviolent offenses, walking away, disobeying commands. But here we hear it from a police officer who's not indicted, who's testifying on behalf of the prosecution. I had my gun drawn, and I was afraid. And I think that puts a different light on what the other officers perceive. Because
they didn't open fire. Only Jason Van Dyke. The question is, did they try to cover it up? Did they automatically assume, hey, we didn't classify this as a homicide. We said he was the perpetrator, he was the assailant, he was gunned down. Was that appropriate? Because we all agreed this was a murder.
Yeah, there's no question. Someone's been convicted of second-degree murder as a result of this shooting. But the issue here is these officers wrote a report. And they wrote a report based on what they perceived. And if as Officer McGilligot said, I had a gun in my hand, I was afraid, well then that sheds a different light on what these other officers might have been thinking at the same time and what they later included in their report.
Now, we're all waiting to see if those emails are let in and it will dictate the rest of the trial, but what do you think the defense is going to do when they're ultimately handed the case? And I know we only have about 15, 20 seconds left.
Again, they're going to try to prove to the judge that, hey, they just wrote these reports based on what they perceived. There was no conspiracy. This was their own perception of what happened.
Well, we'll have to see if it ultimately works. Matthew Mangino, thanks so much for coming on, and have a safe trip back home.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, everybody, here's what we're going to do. We will take a break, but there's a lot more we have to talk about in this case because, again, court will be live tomorrow, so we are recapping the most important pieces of testimony and moments that happened this past week, and we'll also delve a little bit more into the Jason Van Dyke trial. So stay tuned here on Law and Crime.